The year was 1887, and the eastern sky over Boston was hidden beneath a blanket of gray clouds as Clara Whitmore stood alone on the crowded train platform. At 23 years old, she owned little more than a small leather satchel and the faded blue dress she wore. There had been a time when her life promised comfort and security. Her father had worked as a respected bookkeeper, and her mother had taught piano lessons to neighborhood children. Their modest home had always been filled with warmth, laughter, and dreams for Clara's future. But life could change without warning. Within 2 years, a deadly fever had claimed both of her parents. Medical bills consumed the family's savings, and creditors quickly took possession of their home. Friends who had once promised support quietly disappeared, each burdened by troubles of their own. Clara found work as a seamstress in a garment factory, spending long hours stitching dresses she could never afford to wear. The pay barely covered a rented room and simple meals, and every passing month seemed to steal another piece of her hope. Marriage seemed impossible. Most respectable men sought women with family connections or property. Clara had neither. She had beauty hidden beneath exhaustion, intelligence buried under hardship, and kindness that no one seemed willing to notice. One rainy afternoon, while delivering finished garments to a boarding house, Clara noticed a newspaper lying on a table. Between advertisements for farming equipment and railroad schedules was a small notice that caught her attention. Respectable ranch owner in Arizona Territory seeks honest Christian wife. Home provided. Travel expenses reimbursed upon arrival. She read the advertisement several times. It sounded almost too good to believe. For weeks she carried the clipping folded inside her Bible. Every evening she debated whether to answer it. She had heard whispers about mail-order brides, women traveling west to marry men they had never met. Some found happiness. Others vanished into lives no one ever heard about again. Yet what future awaited her in Boston? Another decade behind a sewing machine? Another winter wondering if she could afford coal to heat her tiny room? One night, after saying her prayers, Clara dipped her pen into ink and began writing. She introduced herself honestly. She described her education, her love of reading, her ability to cook and sew, and her hope of building a peaceful family. She did not exaggerate her accomplishments or pretend to be wealthy. She simply asked for a chance to begin again. Weeks later, a reply arrived. The letter came from Horace Bell, a prosperous cattle rancher outside the growing town of Prescott in the Arizona Territory. His handwriting was neat but formal. He explained that he owned thousands of acres, several hired hands, and a comfortable ranch house. He claimed to seek not romance but companionship, honesty, and someone capable of managing a household. To Clara, the letter sounded practical rather than affectionate, but practicality felt safer than empty promises. They exchanged several more letters. Horace enclosed a train ticket and instructions for the journey west. Although he promised to reimburse her expenses after her arrival, Clara still needed money for food, overnight lodging during transfers, and basic necessities. She sold nearly everything she owned. Her mother's silver hairbrush. Her father's pocket watch. Even the rocking chair where her parents had spent quiet evenings reading together. Each sale felt like saying goodbye to another treasured memory. Before boarding the train, Clara visited her parents' graves. Kneeling between the simple headstones, she whispered through tears. "I don't know what's waiting for me. But I can't stay here anymore. Please watch over me." The long journey west took more than a week. At first, the scenery outside her window was familiar: busy cities, green forests, and rolling farms. Gradually the landscape changed into endless plains, dry hills, and distant mountains unlike anything she had ever imagined. Passengers came and went at every station. Some were miners chasing fortunes. Others were families hoping to claim land under the Homestead Act. Everyone seemed to carry dreams of a better future. Clara guarded her satchel carefully. Inside were her letters from Horace, a family Bible, a small photograph of her parents, a change of clothing, and the few dollars she had left. During one overnight stop, exhaustion overcame caution. She fell asleep in the station waiting room with her satchel beneath the bench. When she awoke, it was gone. She searched frantically. She questioned station workers. She begged travelers for help. Nothing. The thief had vanished into the darkness. The loss was devastating. Along with her money, the satchel had carried nearly everything connecting her to her old life. Only the photograph of her parents remained because she had tucked it inside her coat pocket before sleeping. Determined not to give up, Clara continued the journey wearing the same dress day after day. Dust settled into every fold of the fabric. Small tears appeared along the hem. By the time the train reached Arizona, her once neat appearance had been reduced to little more than worn clothing and tired eyes. She stepped onto the wooden platform beneath the blazing desert sun. The heat struck her like the opening of a furnace. Nearby stood a well-dressed man beside an elegant wagon. His polished boots, expensive coat, and confident posture made it easy to recognize him as Horace Bell. Clara smiled with quiet relief and walked toward him. "Mr. Bell?" she asked softly. "I'm Clara Whitmore." Horace looked her up and down. His expression hardened instantly. Instead of seeing the educated, hopeful woman from the letters, he saw only a dusty traveler in ragged clothes. His voice carried loudly enough for others nearby to hear. "You must be mistaken." Clara's heart sank. "I've traveled from Boston," she explained. "My belongings were stolen on the way." "I still have your letters." "I ordered a wife," Horace interrupted coldly. "Not a beggar looking for charity." People on the platform turned to stare. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others whispered behind their hands. Clara reached into her pocket to show one of his letters, but Horace waved her away before she could unfold it. "I won't have my neighbors thinking I brought home a vagrant," he said. "Find somewhere else to go." Without another word, he climbed into his wagon and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the hot desert air. Clara remained standing on the platform, too stunned even to cry. Everything she had sacrificed, her home, her memories, her possessions, and her faith in a new beginning, seemed to have vanished in a single cruel moment. As the station slowly emptied and the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, she realized she was completely alone in a place where no one knew her name. With nowhere else to turn, Clara picked up the small bundle she still carried, took one last look at the town that had rejected her, and began walking toward the vast desert beyond, unaware that destiny was already watching from the distant hills. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly before Clara Whitmore as she walked beneath the blazing afternoon sun. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her shoes, worn thin from the long journey west, scraped against the rocky trail, while the relentless heat drained the little strength she had left. The rejection at the train station echoed in her mind like a cruel refrain. "I ordered a wife, not a beggar looking for charity." Horace Bell's words had wounded her more deeply than she cared to admit. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles believing that somewhere beyond the horizon waited a chance to begin again. Instead, she had been judged by the dust on her dress rather than the heart that had carried her across the country. She refused to cry. She had shed enough tears during the past 2 years. As evening approached, the desert began to change. The scorching heat softened into a warm breeze, and the sky transformed into brilliant shades of orange and crimson. Towering cacti cast long shadows across the earth, while distant mountains glowed beneath the setting sun. Beautiful as it was, the landscape frightened Clara. She had never seen a place so vast or so empty. The little path she followed slowly disappeared among scattered rocks and thorny shrubs. She searched for signs of a farmhouse, a stream, or even another traveler, but there was nothing except silence. By nightfall, exhaustion overwhelmed her. She had eaten only a crust of bread since morning and had almost no water remaining. Her legs trembled with every step. "I only need to rest for a moment," she whispered to herself. She sat beneath the twisted branches of a mesquite tree, intending to close her eyes for only a few minutes. Instead, darkness claimed her. When Clara opened her eyes again, she thought she was dreaming. Above her stretched the roof of a small wooden cabin. Sunlight filtered through narrow cracks between the logs. The air smelled faintly of cedar smoke and fresh herbs. For a moment she panicked. Where was she? She quickly sat upright, only to discover that someone had wrapped a clean blanket around her shoulders. A clay cup rested beside the bed, filled with cool water. Before she could gather her thoughts, the cabin door opened. A tall man stepped inside. His long black hair was tied neatly behind his shoulders, and his weathered buckskin clothing blended with the colors of the desert itself. Around his neck hung a small carved pendant shaped like an eagle. He carried a bundle of firewood in one arm. The moment he noticed Clara awake, he stopped. Neither of them spoke. His dark eyes met hers. There was no anger in them. No suspicion. Only quiet curiosity. Clara instinctively pulled the blanket closer around herself. I don't know where I am, she said cautiously. The man remained silent for a moment before speaking in careful English. You are safe. His voice was deep but gentle. You fainted. Clara blinked in surprise. You speak English. A little. He placed the firewood beside the stone fireplace before continuing. My name is Kai. Clara had heard stories about the Apache people while growing up in Boston. Newspapers often described them as dangerous warriors who attacked settlers without warning. Travelers spoke their name with fear. Yet nothing about the man standing before her matched those stories. He had kind eyes. Calm movements. And when he handed her the cup of water, he did so with quiet respect. You found me? Clara asked. Kai nodded. My horse smelled someone near the trail. You carried me here. Again he nodded. You had no water. Clara looked down at the cup in her hands. You saved my life. Kai simply shrugged, as though helping a stranger required no praise. In the desert, he said softly, people help people. Over the next 2 days, Clara slowly regained her strength. Kai's cabin stood near a hidden spring surrounded by cottonwood trees, a peaceful place tucked away between rocky hills. The water was clear and cool, and small birds filled the mornings with cheerful songs. Every sunrise, Kai disappeared before dawn. Sometimes he returned carrying fish from a nearby stream. Other times he brought rabbits or baskets filled with wild berries, cactus fruit, and edible plants. He rarely wasted words. Instead, he communicated through quiet actions. When Clara's torn dress caught on a nail, he carefully repaired the loose board so it would not happen again. When she struggled to light the cooking fire, he patiently demonstrated how to arrange the wood without making her feel foolish. When she coughed from the dry desert air, he brewed tea from local herbs gathered along the hillsides. Little by little, Clara began to realize that kindness could exist without grand speeches. One afternoon, while Kai sharpened a hunting knife outside the cabin, Clara gathered enough courage to ask the question that had troubled her since waking. Why do you live alone? Kai stopped sharpening the blade. For several moments he stared toward the distant mountains. Finally, he answered. My family. His voice grew quieter. They are gone. Clara waited patiently. Many winters ago, sickness came. He looked down at the ground. My wife. A pause. My son. Another pause. They died. The silence that followed spoke louder than any explanation. Clara's heart ached. She understood that kind of loneliness all too well. I lost my parents, she said gently. Kai looked at her for the first time since beginning his story. When? 2 years ago. He nodded slowly. No family now. No. They sat together beneath the shade of the cottonwood tree without speaking. For the first time in many months, Clara felt that someone truly understood her pain, not because he offered comforting words, but because he carried the same sorrow in his own heart. As the days passed, trust quietly replaced fear. Kai never treated Clara as someone weak or helpless. Instead, he invited her to walk with him through the desert. He showed her how to recognize animal tracks pressed into the sand. He pointed out which plants provided food and which hid sharp thorns or poison. He taught her that the desert, though harsh, was full of life for those who respected it. In return, Clara shared pieces of her own world. She spoke about Boston's crowded streets, towering church steeples, and snowy winters. She described libraries filled with thousands of books. She laughed while trying to explain what autumn leaves looked like when they covered every sidewalk in brilliant shades of red and gold. Kai listened carefully. Sometimes he smiled. It was never a broad smile. Just the smallest curve of his lips. Yet somehow it warmed Clara more than any grand display of affection ever could. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Clara glanced toward Kai. He was quietly carving a small wooden bird with his hunting knife. The fading light reflected in his dark eyes. Without realizing it, she found herself smiling. Kai looked up. Their eyes met once again. This time neither of them looked away. No words were needed. In that single, lingering glance, Clara saw not the man described in fearful newspaper stories, but a lonely soul carrying invisible scars, just as she carried her own. And Kai, looking into Clara's gentle eyes, no longer saw a helpless stranger dressed in rags. He saw a woman whose courage had survived betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. Neither of them understood it yet. But the quiet bond forming between them would soon change both of their lives forever. The days turned into weeks, and for the first time in years, Clara Whitmore no longer woke with fear in her heart. Each morning, the rising sun painted the Arizona sky with shades of gold and crimson. Birds sang from the cottonwood trees surrounding the hidden spring, and a cool breeze carried the scent of wild sage through the valley. Life at Kai's cabin was simple, quiet, and honest, a world completely different from the noisy streets of Boston or the grand promises that had lured her west. There were no servants. No elegant furniture. No expensive dresses. Yet Clara had never felt richer. She stepped outside one morning to find Kai repairing a section of the wooden fence that surrounded his small vegetable garden. A few chickens wandered nearby, pecking at the ground, while his old horse grazed peacefully beside the stream. Without saying a word, Clara picked up several loose boards and carried them toward him. Kai looked up. "You do not have to help," he said. Clara smiled. "I know." She handed him another nail. "But I want to." For a brief moment, Kai smiled back. It was becoming easier for him. Their days slowly settled into a comfortable rhythm. Before sunrise, Kai would leave to hunt or check the traps he had set in the hills. Clara spent the morning sweeping the cabin, washing clothes in the stream, tending the small garden, and preparing meals from whatever Kai brought home. She repaired torn blankets, mended his buckskin shirts, and even stitched new curtains from pieces of old cloth she found stored inside a wooden chest. When Kai returned one afternoon carrying fresh venison over his shoulder, he stopped in surprise. The cabin looked different. Fresh flowers decorated the small wooden table. The fireplace had been cleaned. The shelves were neatly organized. Even the worn rocking chair had been repaired. Kai slowly turned toward Clara. "You did all this?" She nodded nervously. "I hope you don't mind." For several seconds, he simply looked around the room. Then he quietly said, "It feels like home again." Those 6 words touched Clara more deeply than any compliment she had ever received. Although Kai spoke English well enough for simple conversations, Clara noticed that reading was difficult for him. One rainy afternoon, she found him studying an old English Bible with a puzzled expression. She walked over carefully. "Would you like some help?" Kai hesitated. Then he nodded. Clara sat beside him and pointed to the first sentence. "This word is beginning," she explained gently. Kai repeated it. "Beginning." She smiled. Very good. Over the following weeks, those quiet lessons became part of their daily routine. Using scraps of paper and bits of charcoal, Clara wrote simple words. Water. Mountain. Horse. Friend. Kai practiced each one carefully. Sometimes he pronounced them perfectly. Sometimes they came out wrong, causing Clara to laugh. At first, Kai looked embarrassed. Then, hearing Clara's cheerful laughter, he found himself laughing too. It was a sound he had almost forgotten. One afternoon, Kai returned carrying something wrapped in soft cloth. I have something, he said. Curious, Clara unfolded the bundle. Inside lay a small necklace carved from smooth desert stone. At its center hung a tiny hummingbird shaped with remarkable skill. It's beautiful, she whispered. You made this? Kai nodded. My mother taught me. Clara carefully traced the carving with her fingertips. I've never received a gift made by someone's own hands. Kai looked slightly uncomfortable. In my people, he explained, a gift made with time means more than one bought with money. Clara carefully fastened the necklace around her neck. I'll treasure it always. Kai lowered his eyes, hiding the quiet happiness those words brought him. As trust deepened between them, Clara became curious about Kai's past. One evening, while they sat beside a crackling fire beneath a sky crowded with stars, she finally asked. Were you always alone? Kai stared into the flames. No. After a long silence, he continued. My father was a hunter. My mother gathered herbs. I had brothers. He paused. We laughed much. What happened? Kai drew a slow breath. There was fighting. He did not speak with anger. Only sadness. Settlers came. Soldiers came. Some of my people wanted revenge. Others wanted peace. He picked up a small stick and stirred the fire. My wife became sick during that time. There was no medicine. My son. His voice caught. He was only 5 winters old. Clara gently placed her hand over his. Kai looked surprised. No one had touched him with such simple kindness in many years. I'm so sorry, she whispered. He closed his eyes for a moment. So am I. Later that same night, Clara found herself sharing memories she had kept buried inside her heart. I used to play the piano, she said softly. Kai looked at her. My mother loved music. Every Sunday evening, she filled our little house with songs. She smiled sadly. My father couldn't sing at all. Kai raised an eyebrow. No. She laughed. He was terribly off-key. Kai chuckled. So was my father. For a moment, both of them laughed together beneath the stars. The sound echoed across the quiet valley. Neither realized how much they had both missed laughter. Weeks passed. Summer slowly settled over the desert. Together they planted corn, beans, and squash beside the spring. Kai taught Clara how to recognize approaching rain simply by watching the clouds gather around distant mountains. He showed her how to follow deer tracks without frightening the animals. He explained which plants healed wounds and which should never be touched. The desert gives, he told her one morning. But only if you respect it. Clara listened carefully. In return, she taught Kai about maps. Using charcoal, she drew the outline of the United States on a smooth piece of wood. She pointed toward Massachusetts. This is where I was born. Kai studied the drawing carefully. So far. It felt even farther after my train was robbed, Clara admitted with a small smile. Kai looked at her thoughtfully. Do you miss it? She considered the question. I miss my parents. She looked around the peaceful valley. But not the life I left behind. Meanwhile, miles away in Prescott, rumors began spreading through the town. Some claimed the mail-order bride had died in the desert. Others insisted the Apache had captured her. At the Silver Spur Saloon, men gathered around rough wooden tables, exchanging exaggerated stories. "I heard they found her bonnet near Apache land," one cowboy declared. "Nonsense," another replied. "If the Apache had taken her, we'd have heard by now." Horace Bell sat quietly in the corner, pretending not to listen. Deep inside, however, unease had begun to grow. He remembered the letters Clara had written before leaving Boston. She had mentioned something unusual. Her late father had owned documents connected to a small parcel of land inherited from a distant relative years earlier. At the time, Horace had paid little attention. Now, after speaking with a local lawyer, he realized that forgotten claim might be worth a fortune if valuable minerals were discovered nearby. If Clara were alive, those papers would still belong to her. And if she married someone else, he would never gain control of them. For the first time since rejecting her at the station, Horace wished he had looked beyond her dusty clothes. Not because he regretted hurting her. Because he regretted losing what she might possess. Greed began to replace pride. He quietly hired 2 men to search the surrounding desert. "Find the woman," he ordered. "I don't care where she's hiding." Back at the cabin, Clara knew nothing of the danger growing beyond the hills. One peaceful evening, she and Kai sat beside the hidden spring, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. The water reflected the colors of the sky like polished glass. A gentle breeze stirred the cottonwood leaves. Without thinking, Clara reached for Kai's hand. He looked down at their fingers. Then slowly intertwined his hand with hers. Neither spoke. There was no need. 2 lonely hearts, once broken by grief and rejection, had begun to heal, not through grand declarations or dramatic promises, but through shared mornings, quiet laughter, honest work, and the silent understanding that sometimes the deepest love begins as friendship. Neither Clara nor Kai realized that their peaceful days were about to be tested. Beyond the mountains, men driven by greed were already following their trail, and the fragile happiness they had built together would soon face its greatest challenge. By early autumn, the hidden valley had become more than a place of shelter for Clara Whitmore. It had become home. The mornings began with birdsong drifting through the cottonwood trees, while the evenings ended beside a warm fire as she and Kai shared simple meals and quiet conversations. The pain of her past had not disappeared, but it no longer ruled her life. She had stopped counting the days since she had arrived in Arizona. For the first time in years, she was living instead of merely surviving. One crisp morning, Clara stood outside the cabin hanging freshly washed clothes on a line stretched between 2 trees. Around her neck rested the hummingbird necklace Kai had carved by hand. She touched it gently, smiling to herself. Kai emerged from the stable, tightening the saddle on his horse. "I'll be gone until sunset," he said. "Checking the northern hills?" He nodded. "The deer are moving before winter." Clara handed him a small cloth bag. "I packed your lunch." Kai accepted it with a grateful smile. "You always think ahead." She laughed softly. "Someone has to." Before leaving, Kai hesitated. Something about the morning felt different. The birds had suddenly grown quiet. His horse lifted its head, ears pointed toward the distant hills. Kai's expression became serious. "What is it?" Clara asked. He scanned the horizon. "I don't know. But the land is speaking." Clara had heard him say that before. The desert often warned those who knew how to listen. Without another word, Kai mounted his horse and rode away. Several miles from the valley, 3 riders slowly crossed the rocky landscape. Leading them was Horace Bell. His expensive coat was covered in desert dust, but his determination had not faded. Beside him rode 2 hired men, Caleb Turner and Roy Higgins, both experienced trackers willing to do almost anything for money. Roy pointed toward a patch of disturbed sand. "Horse tracks." Caleb dismounted to inspect them. Fresh. He looked up. Someone's living nearby. Horace's eyes narrowed. Keep moving. As they continued, they discovered signs that confirmed their suspicions. A recently extinguished campfire. Footprints beside a stream. Fresh-cut branches used to repair fencing. Horace smiled. She's alive. Caleb frowned. If she's alive, why hasn't she returned to town? Horace answered without hesitation. The Apache are holding her. It was a convenient lie. Deep inside, he suspected something very different. He remembered Clara's determination during their letters. If anyone could survive hardship, it was the woman he had foolishly dismissed. Still, telling the truth would not help him. He needed others to believe she was a captive. Only then could he gather enough men to reclaim both Clara, and the valuable land documents she might still possess. That evening, Horace returned to Prescott and called together several influential townsmen inside the Silver Spur Saloon. The room buzzed with conversation until Horace stood. "I found evidence," he announced loudly. "The missing bride is alive." The room fell silent. One rancher leaned forward. "Where?" "Apache territory." Murmurs spread across the room. Another man slammed his fist against the table. "We should ride out immediately." Horace raised a hand dramatically. "I believe she's being held against her will." The lie settled heavily over the room. Most of the men had never met Clara. They knew only the story Horace had chosen to tell. A young blacksmith named Daniel Carter frowned. "Did you actually see her?" Horace hesitated for the briefest moment. "No. But the signs are clear." Daniel remained unconvinced. "What if you're wrong?" Horace's voice hardened. "Would you rather do nothing while an innocent woman suffers?" The question left little room for disagreement. Within an hour, a rescue posse had begun to form. Some men joined out of genuine concern. Others hoped for reward or excitement. Only Horace understood his true purpose. Meanwhile, danger approached from another direction. Late the next afternoon, Kai returned from hunting earlier than expected. He carried no game. His face was unusually tense. Clara noticed immediately. "What happened?" Kai tied his horse quickly. "I found tracks." "What kind?" "3 horses." He knelt beside the dirt outside the cabin and drew several lines with a stick. They came close. Very close. Clara looked toward the hills. Could they be travelers? Kai slowly shook his head. "Travelers stay on the main trail." He pointed toward another mark. These men searched. A chill ran through Clara. Searching for what? Kai looked directly at her. "You." That night, neither of them slept well. Every distant sound seemed louder than usual. The howl of a coyote echoed through the canyon. Wind rustled the trees outside the cabin. Several times Kai stepped outdoors to study the darkness. Just before dawn, he returned inside. "We leave today." Clara stared at him. "Leave?" "Only for a little while. Until we know who is searching." She glanced around the cabin. "This is your home." Kai nodded sadly. "A home can be rebuilt." He looked at her with quiet determination. "You cannot." As Clara packed a few blankets and supplies, she opened the small wooden box that held her remaining possessions. Inside lay the photograph of her parents. Her mother's Bible. And several folded letters tied together with faded ribbon. Among them was an envelope she had nearly forgotten. Her father's handwriting covered the front. She opened it carefully. Inside rested several legal documents bearing official seals. Confused, she unfolded them. Kai watched silently. "What are they?" I'm not sure." She quickly read through the faded pages. Her breathing slowed. My father inherited land years ago. She looked up. I thought it was worthless. Kai studied her expression. It is not. She shook her head. According to these papers, the land was never sold. A map accompanied the documents. Clara spread it across the table. One marked boundary immediately caught her attention. It lay not far from Prescott. The same region where Horace Bell owned his ranch. Suddenly everything made sense. His sudden interest. His rejection. His determination to find her. He wasn't looking for a wife, Clara whispered. He wanted this. Kai's face darkened. The papers. Clara nodded. If I disappeared, he could claim them. A heavy silence filled the room. For the first time, Clara understood that Horace's cruelty had been driven not merely by pride, but by greed. That afternoon, Kai rode to a nearby Apache settlement where several members of his extended family still lived. Although he had spent years in quiet isolation, they welcomed him warmly. Among them was an elderly leader named White Eagle, whose wisdom was respected throughout the region. After listening carefully to Kai's story, White Eagle remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. The desert carries many kinds of storms. Kai nodded. This one wears boots. Several warriors chuckled softly. White Eagle did not. If the settlers believe lies, he said, fear will guide their hands. What should we do? The old leader looked toward the mountains. We prepare. But we do not strike first. Kai respected those words. Violence would only deepen the hatred between their people and the settlers. Yet he also knew they could not ignore the danger approaching. Back at the cabin, Clara stood outside watching the evening sky turn shades of red and violet. She clutched the land documents tightly against her chest. The peaceful life she and Kai had built suddenly felt fragile. She heard hoofbeats in the distance. Kai returned just as darkness settled across the valley. He dismounted and walked toward her. They are coming, he said quietly. How many? More than 20. Clara's eyes widened. So many. They believe they are rescuing you. She looked down sadly. But I don't need rescuing. Kai met her gaze. I know. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara stepped closer and took his hand. I've spent my whole life running from loneliness, she said softly. I won't run from the truth. Kai squeezed her hand gently. No matter what happens. She nodded without hesitation. No matter what happens. Far beyond the hills, lanterns flickered as Horace Bell's posse rode through the darkness, convinced they were marching toward a heroic rescue. In reality, they were being led by one man's greed. And with every mile they traveled, the quiet valley where two lonely hearts had found peace moved one step closer to becoming the center of a conflict that would test courage, loyalty, and love more than either Clara or Kai could have imagined. The first light of dawn crept over the Arizona mountains, casting long shadows across the hidden valley. Usually, the morning brought peace, a chorus of birds, the gentle murmur of the spring, and the soft rustling of cottonwood leaves. But on this day, the silence felt unnatural. Kai stood outside the cabin, watching the ridgeline. His instincts, sharpened by years of living in the desert, warned him that something was wrong. Clara stepped onto the porch carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. You've been awake all night, she said quietly. Kai accepted the cup but never took his eyes off the hills. They're close. Clara followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing. Then, in the distance, a cloud of dust rose above the rocks. Moments later came the faint sound of horses. They found us, she whispered. Kai nodded. There isn't much time. Inside the cabin, Clara gathered the land documents, her parents' photograph, and the Bible that had traveled with her from Boston. She wrapped them carefully in a cloth and placed them inside a leather pouch. Kai quickly packed dried meat, water, blankets, and a small medicine bag filled with healing herbs. "We can escape through the northern canyon," he said. "The trail is narrow. Horses cannot move quickly there." Clara looked around the little cabin. Every corner held memories. The rocking chair she had repaired. The curtains she had sewn. The table where she had taught Kai to read. It was the first place that had truly felt like home since losing her parents. "I don't want to leave," she admitted. Kai rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "A house is made of wood." He looked into her eyes. "Home is where we stay together." Clara smiled through tears. "Then let's go." Before they could leave, a voice echoed across the valley. "Clara Whitmore. Horace Bell." He rode at the front of nearly 20 armed men. Behind him came ranchers, cowboys, and a few townspeople who genuinely believed they were rescuing an innocent woman. Kai and Clara stepped outside together. Horace raised one hand dramatically. "Miss Whitmore," he shouted. "We've come to save you." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "Save me?" "Don't be afraid," Horace continued. "We know the Apache forced you to stay here." Several men nodded sympathetically. They had no reason to doubt his story. Clara took a step forward. "No one forced me." Horace's confident smile faded. "You don't have to lie." "I'm not lying." She stood beside Kai, her voice growing stronger. "I chose to stay." Confused murmurs spread through the group. Daniel Carter, the young blacksmith who had questioned Horace earlier, looked carefully at Clara. She showed no signs of fear. No bruises. No ropes. Nothing suggested she was a prisoner. Daniel frowned. "Mr. Bell." Horace ignored him. He pointed accusingly at Kai. "He's threatening you." Clara shook her head. "No. He saved my life." Horace's face reddened with anger. "Men," he shouted. "Take the woman." Several riders hesitated. Others obeyed, urging their horses forward. Kai stepped protectively in front of Clara. He reached for his bow but did not raise it. "I do not want to fight," he called calmly. "Then surrender." Horace yelled. "I will not surrender someone who is free." Without warning, one of Horace's hired men fired a rifle into the air. The loud crack shattered the morning silence. Horses reared. Birds exploded from the trees. Panic swept through both groups. Kai grabbed Clara's hand. "Run!" Together they raced toward the narrow canyon behind the cabin. Bullets struck rocks nearby, sending sharp fragments into the air. Kai refused to fire back. Instead, he guided Clara along hidden paths only he knew. The canyon walls grew steeper with every step. Behind them, several riders attempted to follow. But the rocky trail was too narrow. One horse slipped, forcing the others to stop. Kai and Clara gained precious time. Farther up the canyon, they reached a high overlook. From there, Clara looked back. Smoke rose from the valley. My God! Someone had set fire to the cabin. Tears filled her eyes. Our home. Kai watched silently. Years of memories disappeared beneath growing flames. Yet his face remained calm. It can be rebuilt. Clara looked at him. You love that place. I love who was inside it. His words gave her strength. Meanwhile, events below began to change. Daniel Carter rode toward the burning cabin. He noticed Horace speaking angrily with Caleb Turner. The two men believed no one could hear them. We have to find those papers, Horace hissed. Forget the woman if you must, but bring me the documents. Daniel froze. What papers? Horace turned suddenly. For a brief second, panic crossed his face. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You said this was a rescue. It is. No. Daniel dismounted. This is about money. Other members of the posse began gathering around. What papers? Someone asked. Horace struggled to answer. Finally Caleb muttered, her father's land claim. Silence swept through the group. An older rancher looked horrified. You lied to us. Horace's temper exploded. I did what was necessary. You manipulated this whole town, Daniel said. You made us believe an innocent man had kidnapped a woman. Several riders slowly lowered their rifles. They looked toward the burning cabin with shame. At that very moment, movement appeared along the surrounding cliffs. Dozens of Apache riders emerged silently from behind the rocks. At their head rode White Eagle. The warriors carried bows and rifles. Yet none attacked. They simply surrounded the valley, watching. White Eagle rode forward alone. He spoke calmly. We did not come for war. His steady voice echoed through the canyon. But we will protect our people. The settlers glanced nervously at one another. For the first time, they realized they were outnumbered. Still, White Eagle made no move to attack. Daniel stepped forward. No one else needs to get hurt. Several townsmen nodded. One by one, rifles were lowered. The desire to fight disappeared as the truth became clear. Only Horace still refused to yield. This isn't over, he shouted. He spurred his horse toward the canyon, determined to chase Clara himself. But in his anger, he failed to notice the loose stones beneath his horse's feet. The frightened animal stumbled. Horace was thrown hard to the ground. The leather pouch hidden beneath his coat burst open, scattering forged legal papers across the dirt. Daniel picked one up. His expression darkened. These are fake. Another man examined the documents. He planned to steal her land. Whispers quickly turned into angry accusations. Horace's own companions surrounded him. The sheriff, who had ridden with the posse but stayed behind during the confusion, finally stepped forward. It's over, Bell. He removed a pair of iron handcuffs from his saddlebag. You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, attempted theft, and inciting violence. Horace looked around desperately. No one came to his defense. The men he had deceived now stood against him. High above the valley, Clara and Kai watched as the conflict came to an end without another shot being fired. I can't believe it's over, Clara whispered. Kai smiled faintly. Truth walks slowly. He looked toward the valley below. But it always arrives. Clara reached for his hand. You never stopped believing in peace. Kai squeezed her fingers gently. My father once told me. He paused. A warrior is not measured by how quickly he fights, but by how wisely he avoids fighting. Clara smiled. He was a wise man. He was. By sunset, the fire had burned itself out. The cabin was gone. Only the stone chimney remained standing against the fading sky. Yet as Clara and Kai descended from the canyon together, neither felt defeated. They had lost walls, a roof, and possessions. But they had protected something far more valuable. Their trust. Their honor. And the love that had quietly grown between them through shared hardships and gentle kindness. The greatest battle of their lives had not been won with weapons. It had been won with truth. And though the ashes of their old home still smoldered beneath the evening sky, both Clara and Kai knew that from those ashes, a new beginning was waiting to rise. The smoke from the burned cabin lingered in the cool morning air long after the flames had died. Charred pieces of timber lay scattered across the valley, and only the stone chimney remained standing as a silent reminder of the home Kai and Clara had built together. Clara stood beside the ruins with her hands clasped in front of her. A few weeks earlier, seeing such destruction would have broken her spirit. Now, she felt something different. Hope. She glanced at Kai, who was quietly lifting blackened beams from the ashes. His movements were calm and steady, as though rebuilding was simply another part of life. She walked over and picked up a fallen board. "What are you doing?" she asked. Kai smiled. "Beginning again." Clara laughed softly. "That's all." He shrugged. "What else can we do?" She smiled back. "Then let's begin together." News of Horace Bell's arrest spread quickly through Prescott. The townspeople were shocked to learn that the respected rancher had lied to nearly everyone. His forged documents, false claims, and greed had nearly caused bloodshed between innocent settlers and the Apache people. At the courthouse, witnesses came forward one after another. Daniel Carter testified about overhearing Horace's plan. Several members of the posse admitted they had been deceived into believing Clara had been kidnapped. Even Caleb Turner, hoping for a lighter sentence, confessed that Horace had hired him only to recover Clara's land papers. When Clara was asked to testify, she entered the courtroom with quiet confidence. Many people expected to see a frightened woman. Instead, they saw someone whose hardships had made her stronger. The judge listened carefully as she described her journey from Boston, the theft of her belongings, Horace's cruel rejection at the train station, and the kindness Kai had shown when she collapsed in the desert. Not once did she exaggerate. Not once did she seek revenge. She simply spoke the truth. When her testimony ended, the courtroom remained silent for several moments. Finally, the judge looked toward Kai. "You risked your own safety to save a stranger." Kai answered simply. "It was the right thing." The judge nodded. "More people should think that way." Weeks later, Horace Bell was convicted of fraud, forgery, attempted theft, and other crimes connected to his scheme. His ranch was sold to repay debts and compensate those he had deceived, while Clara's legal ownership of her inherited land was officially recognized. Although Clara now possessed land that could make her financially comfortable, she surprised everyone with her decision. One evening, she spread the property map across a small wooden table. Kai studied it. "You could build a large house." "I could." "You could move to town." "I could." Kai looked at her. "What do you want?" Clara folded the map. "I already found what I was searching for." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I came west looking for a husband." She smiled warmly. "I found a home instead." Kai's eyes softened. "And I found my family again." Throughout the winter, settlers from Prescott and members of White Eagle's Apache community worked side by side to rebuild the cabin. At first, the atmosphere was cautious. Years of fear and misunderstanding could not disappear overnight. Some settlers had never spoken peacefully with an Apache family before. Some Apache elders still carried painful memories of broken promises from outsiders. Yet work has a way of bringing people together. They cut timber, raised walls, repaired fences, shared meals around evening campfires. Children laughed together while adults slowly learned to trust one another. One afternoon, Daniel Carter arrived carrying a wagon full of lumber. "I figured you might need this," he said. Kai smiled. "Thank you." Daniel scratched the back of his neck. "I owe you an apology." Kai looked puzzled. "I believed the worst about you because of stories I'd heard." Kai nodded thoughtfully. "My people believed stories about yours too." Daniel chuckled. "Maybe stories aren't always true." "No," Kai agreed. "They are not." By spring, the new cabin stood stronger than the first. It had larger windows, a sturdy porch, and a small garden stretching toward the spring. Near the entrance, Kai carved a hummingbird into one of the porch posts. Clara recognized it immediately. "The same bird from my necklace." Kai smiled. "Hummingbirds survive storms." She wrapped her arms around him. "So did we." As the seasons passed, Clara noticed that many children living near Prescott had little opportunity for education. Some Apache children knew only their own language. Many settler children had never learned to read beyond a few simple words. An idea began to grow. With White Eagle's blessing and support from several townspeople, Clara converted an old storage building into a one-room schoolhouse. Every morning, children from different backgrounds gathered together. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history. More importantly, she encouraged them to learn about one another. Sometimes Kai visited to teach traditional Apache tracking skills and explain the importance of respecting nature. Other days, White Eagle shared stories passed down through generations. The children listened with wide eyes. For them, friendship came more easily than prejudice. Watching them laugh together filled Clara with quiet happiness. This, she whispered one afternoon, is how the future begins. One warm summer evening, nearly 3 years after Clara had first stepped off the train in ragged clothes, the valley hosted a celebration unlike any it had ever seen. Settlers and Apache families gathered beneath strings of lanterns hanging from the cottonwood trees. Long tables overflowed with food. Children chased one another through the grass. Musicians played fiddles while Apache drummers added steady rhythms that echoed across the valley. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, White Eagle stood. He raised one hand, and the crowd gradually fell silent. There was a time, he began, when fear brought people here. He looked toward Clara and Kai. Today, love keeps them here. The crowd applauded warmly. Daniel stepped forward carrying a small wooden box. He handed it to Kai. For your wedding. Kai looked surprised. Inside rested 2 simple silver rings crafted by the town's blacksmith. They're not fancy, Daniel admitted. But they're honest. Kai smiled. They are perfect. The wedding took place the following morning beside the hidden spring where Clara had first regained consciousness. The ceremony was simple. Beautiful. Meaningful. Clara wore a cream-colored dress sewn by her own hands. Around her neck rested the hummingbird necklace Kai had carved years before. Kai wore traditional buckskin clothing with a neatly embroidered sash made by Clara. White Eagle offered a blessing in Apache. The town's minister offered a prayer in English. Neither tradition replaced the other. Instead, they stood together, honoring both cultures with mutual respect. When the ceremony ended, Kai looked into Clara's eyes. You changed my life. She smiled through happy tears. No. She gently squeezed his hands. We changed each other's. Years later, travelers passing through Prescott often heard an unusual story. They spoke of a woman who had arrived in Arizona wearing torn clothes and carrying almost nothing. Many believed her future had ended the day she was rejected at the train station. Instead, it had only begun. They spoke of an Apache man who had once lived alone, carrying grief too heavy for words. One act of compassion had opened his heart again. Together, Clara and Kai built more than a home. They built trust where suspicion had once lived. Friendship where fear had ruled. Hope where despair had taken root. People no longer remembered Clara as the mail-order bride in rags. They remembered her as the teacher who welcomed every child. The woman who refused to answer hatred with hatred. The woman who proved that dignity could never be measured by clothing or wealth. And when elderly neighbors were asked how such an extraordinary story had begun, they always smiled before giving the same answer. It started with one kind act. And with a single look that saw not poverty, not race, not fear, but the heart of another lonely soul. The desert wind still whispered through the cottonwood trees, carrying their story across the valley, a story reminding every generation that love born from kindness is stronger than prejudice, greed, or hardship, and that the greatest journeys often begin when everything else seems lost.